Right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fertility Docs Uncensored. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Carrie Bedient from the Fertility Center of Las Vegas, joined by my two fantabulous girlies, Dr. Susan Hudson from Texas Fertility Center
Hello.
and Dr. Abby Eblen from Nashville Fertility Center.
Hey, everybody.
And
Good to see you guys.
Today, we are joined by Pam Schumann, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SMP Pharmacy. And we're going to have an in-depth discussion about what to do when you get your box of medications. And so we'll go into that. Pam is also on the board of Resolve, which is the biggest advocacy group for fertility patients. So she really hits 360 degrees of what it means to be in this field. So we are very appreciative of you joining us, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. Love your podcast.
It is absolutely our pleasure. And we were just talking ahead of time beforehand, and you said that you like to cook. So what's your signature?
What's cooking in Pam's house?
Yeah, what is cooking in Pam's house? Like, what's your signature dish that you like to make?
Oh, well, this time of year, I keep it pretty simple and fresh. My new obsession is grilled peaches with burrata.
That sounds
and
great.
honey and pistachios and mint.
Oh man, I love
Toast. That's been out a few times this year while peaches are in season. But I like to cook a lot of farm to table, what's available. I try to cook from what's local, as much fresh fish as I can. I do a lot of Middle Eastern food. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
Do you have like a bunch of farmers markets nearby, or do you grow your own stuff, or where do you source your local ingredients?
Two places. There is a year-round farmers market that we have locally here that I go to every Saturday morning, but I also get a CSA share. So I belong to a community farm.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat.
You buy a share, so you really don't know how much produce you're going to get because it kind of depends on how well they're growing. And we've been doing that for about 15 years, which is really fun. The kids would go with us when they were younger.
You know, one time I did that too, and I am not a cook, let me just say. And it was really cool, but you never knew what you were going to get. And we would get some things, and my husband grew up on a farm in Iowa, and we're like, what is this? What do we do with it?
What's kohlrabi and what am I going to do with it every week?
Yeah, exactly.
They give you a list of what it is, especially if it's not something that's easily identifiable.
No, they don't. Or at least my box I had no idea what they were. What's your most unusual ingredient that you got?
I think kohlrabi was one of the things I didn't, and tatsoi, I think it's called, which is sort of a green.
Okay.
But my place would tell you what it was, and they would often provide recipes online on how to use it.
Yours is a little more upscale than mine was.
And you could substitute out or leave behind what you weren't going to use, and they would donate that or make something out of it. So if I knew I had too many carrots for any family could use, I would just leave them behind, and then they would donate them to a food bank.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
So what did you do with what? I don't even know what it is that you just said you got in the box.
I left it behind most.
It's some type of green, isn't it?
Is it like bok choy? Bok choy is a green.
The tatsoi is a green. The kohlrabi is more of a root vegetable, I think, but I'm not exactly sure what we're doing with it. So that one did not make the rotation at my home.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good way to get everybody in the house to eat more vegetables, whether they want to or not.
Yes, my kids were not my biggest fan. They wanted more basic food, but I do think they've become more adventuresome eaters as a result of being exposed to more stuff growing up.
Nice.
I think about even just 20 years ago, the vegetables that were available, even at the normal grocery
store. Yeah.
I mean, it was just kind of plain basic things. And I think it's exciting to go there and it's like, ooh, what's this? And I think one of the things I wish I would do more is just pick up something random and be like, okay, let's web search some sort of recipe and let's make something new from something we've never had before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I got a cookbook on that basically said how to use different ingredients when they're in
Oh yeah.
season. And then, the saying, what grows together goes together. So if it's in the same season, so you'll
Ah,
have, I'm
interesting.
making something strawberry rhubarb today. You
Oh,
always see strawberry rhubarb because they have the same growing season and they
ah,
tend to
interesting.
complement each other as a result. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, nice.
Excellent. Well, we will all be over to dinner at your house
Yeah. What
a
time's
little later
dinner?
this evening. Um,
Shortly after the podcast, we will get together. Good.
A little bit of a commute, but we'll make it.
Yeah.
oh, well,
Excellent.
I mean, there's enough time for us to get out there.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Absolutely.
Hop, skip, and a jump.
Absolutely.
All right, Susan, what kind of questions do you have for us today?
Okay, today is our question. Hi there. I just began my career as a fertility nurse, and during my orientation, your podcast was recommended. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yay.
Oh, that's nice. Wow,
That's
we're
awesome.
training people. That's a little scary though, almost, right?
That's super cool.
I love listening to y'all. Y'all are so knowledgeable and compassionate. I'm 26 years old. I've always had very regular periods, but my cycles have been short, 24 to 25 days. My period length is short, 3 days, and my cycle is relatively light. I've been actively trying to conceive for 2 months now. I've been using OPKs and they have been positive. I got my P4 taken on cycle day 21 and it was 1.3. My OB-GYN thinks that I have something called luteal phase defect. Do you guys think this is treatable with letrozole or Clomid? Should I try to get other testing done? I'm concerned my lining isn't getting thick enough. Thank you for everything you do. Well, thank you so much for listening.
Yay. What do you think, Abby?
I think that's a pretty thin lining. 1.3, or I'm sorry, pretty low progesterone level. 1.3. That's what she
Yeah.
said.
Also, I mean, if you think about it, she's a cycle. That was on cycle day 21, and her cycle is
yeah.
24 to 25 days. So I think there's the potential that your post-ovulatory progesterone, because you have
Is at the
shorter
wrong
cycles,
time.
is actually at the wrong time. That it
Yeah.
may, if you would have done it maybe 3 or 4 days earlier, you would see that it was.
But that still seems pretty low, though. You'd think it'd be a little bit higher than that, even if it's coming down. But
She's just about to start her period in a couple of days. I mean,
yeah. So yeah, could be that you were ovulating, but like Susan said, it was just checked at the wrong time. For somebody like that, anybody that has a period less than about 25 days, I usually just empirically give them progesterone. But I also want to monitor and make sure they're really ovulating, because the problem with giving you empiric progesterone is sometimes we cover up the fact that you're not ovulating if we check your progesterone level. So for you, I probably would bring you in kind of early, maybe as early as day 10 or 11, and just look and see what's going on, and maybe even bring you back to see if you're actually ovulating. And then, yeah, I think it would be fine to give you progesterone once we confirm that you're really ovulating. And that would just be a pill that you would take, or vaginal suppository that you would use, and it would lengthen your cycle out. Because if you have a cycle that's that early and that light of flow, we just worry that the embryo would have a hard time implanting, and potentially, if it didn't implant well, if you didn't make enough progesterone, then it would just start to get implanted, and you may essentially flush it out with your period. What do you think, Carrie?
So I get frustrated with supplementing progesterone, mostly because the theory behind it is stellar. It's dead on. The practice annoys the snot out of everybody, because you take the progesterone and then your period's quote unquote late, which it's not really late. It's just not coming because you're on the progesterone. And then people think they're pregnant and they get their hopes up high.
Yeah.
And then we do the test and we know by blood work that you're not pregnant. And then you stop. And then what was otherwise a pretty predictable period goes all over the place. And so everybody gets kind of cranky at that. And so I would probably lean a little bit more on the side of, checking the progesterone again to see if this is a timing issue. I do think that that's pretty low. Like I'm mostly worried that you're just not ovulating, in which case I'd lean more towards the letrozole side of things in order to help get you to a point where you can ovulate. That's probably how I would go. But part of that is very much my bias of, unless you've got really specific events that you can time around, adding in progesterone is sometimes a lot more challenging and a lot more frustrating than it is helpful.
Kind of my thoughts on, excuse me, on luteal phase defect is it tends to be a chicken or the egg problem. And so what I'm meaning by that is it actually a problem in the luteal phase, or is it a reflection of a problem in the follicular phase, the first half of the menstrual cycle? So I usually start off trying to fix the follicular phase. Now, considering you do have relatively short cycles, you are somebody I would check ovarian reserve pretty darn quickly on,
Yeah.
because
Good
when
point.
women start having cycles that are 24, 25 days, quality and quantity are sometimes at issue. And that's something good to know sooner than later, because if you need to jumpstart things to kind of make things happen faster and be more aggressive than you would otherwise, and not waiting a year to do so, I think it would be very, very reasonable. So, I think, yes, letrozole is probably a good option. Two, progesterone is a reasonable option as well. I would usually do that on top of that. But I do think that ovarian reserve testing is something that I would do in the next month or two.
Excellent. Very cool. All right. So we have been excited about doing this episode because it is probably one of the most practical episodes that
Yes,
we
absolutely.
are going to go through. And so the way that this originated is that Pam and I were both at a meeting and having a conversation. And when I realized that she was in pharmacy, asked her, how many phone calls do you get about people accidentally throwing away their meds when you get that box? And your answer was just stellar, because it shows such a lovely thought process in taking care of patients. And so we really wanted to go through, what do you do when you unpack a box? How do you go about it? How do you think about it? What do you do next? All of those things. And so tell us how you came to be thinking about this in the way that you've approached it.
Yeah, so it was funny when you asked me that at the meeting, and I think my response was probably a lot more often than you could imagine. And
Oh, wow.
so when I got onto the pharmacy side and realized how frequently we replaced medications for patients who had thrown them out, received those phone calls, both from the amount of swirl it creates and anxiety for the
Oh, yeah.
patient and for us, and cost associated with it, because it typically is a patient error in throwing it out. But I took it really personally that if that many people were getting it wrong, then
There
we
may be
were
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
providing the
Yeah.
right information, right? That somehow it was not intuitive for the patient when they received the medications. And so, we're recognizing that while we do this every day, it's new to them, right?
Mhm.
And it is at a very critical point in their journey. It's kind of the beginning of treatment for them, right? When that box shows up, it is sort of
Yeah.
the
Becomes
first
real.
step in treatment, right? You're out of diagnostics and planning, and like we're ready to go. And it's also largely the first time that the treatment is now coming out of the clinical setting and onto their kitchen table. And it's one of the things that they are most actively involved in personally in the IVF cycle,
Mhm.
right? And that's a lot of pressure on them because it's new to them, and they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves to get this right. And they've been told what to do, but it's usually well before they get the medications. And now they've got to remember it. And the
Yeah.
reality is a little bit different. So, um, and from the business side, it's a huge consumption of resources to speak with every patient. We offer injection training and unpack it support for all patients when they receive their packages. But we also felt like this is kind of a generation that's accustomed to more self-serve.
Mhm.
And we wanted to make sure that when they opened the box, A, it felt like something special and empowering showed up, and B, they knew exactly what was in there and what to do with it. And when they didn't, where to go.
Mhm.
Um, and so we can talk a little bit more about what we did to do that, but that's how we've approached it from the what does it feel like when they receive the box, and how do they know how to handle the medications?
So to take some of the anxiety factor when we're talking about this box, and granted, this, when you go into an IVF cycle, even if you've been doing IUI cycles, the amount of medication you're going to be using and the number of types of medication you're going to be using has just increased multifold, right?
Yeah.
So how big are these boxes?
Probably about 2 feet wide.
Oh, wow.
You know, it depends how many medications, because there's many of them have to be refrigerated.
Refrigerated,
So
yeah.
there's a cooler in there and cooler packs to keep them. I mean, they don't really generally need to be refrigerated. You're more making sure they don't fall outside of a range. So better to have them cooler than too warm in transit. There's a sharps container is involved in there, the boxes of the medications, extra needles and syringes for some things. So there's quite a lot in the box,
So don't
and
be
you need to.
surprised when something relatively large shows up.
Exactly. That's right. I think people are surprised by the size of the box.
So I'm kind of interested in what changes did you make? Because you kind of sort of mentioned, this generation likes more hands-on. I find that a lot of people like pictures. I like pictures. I don't like to read stuff as much. What did you
Yep.
change, or what was the one thing that you did that you were like, aha, why didn't we do this sooner?
I don't have one thing, so I'm going to give you a couple things. So
Okay.
first thing I did was have them send me a dummy box, because I consider myself a
That's a great idea.
little bit more informed than the average bear on this, having gone through it and, been on both sides of it. And what I found was it was often packed to minimize the size of the box and not to organize what was in the box.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there's also layers, right? There's refrigerated items and non-refrigerated items. And where you see most people throwing things out is they
Is the
don't go
refrigerated.
below and look at what else
Yep.
is in there. So what we did is we sort of reversed engineered it and said, okay, the first thing is, does the outside of the box tell them to refrigerate it? What side to have up? Which side to open so that needles and syringes aren't flying out when they open it. There's a checkbox on the front of what was done, just like who packed it. Did they check the refrigerated card? We then went to an eco-friendly cooler, because we got a lot of feedback on these styrofoam coolers, these giant styrofoam coolers that were going out. And it allowed a little bit more flexibility. And then we organized with our shipping department where items went consistently, so that if you did call in, our team, without looking at the video, would know refrigerated items are always on the bottom. This is going to sit between the refrigerated and non-refrigerated. These items will be on top. And then we added a little special touch of some tissue paper on the top and a hope bracelet that we do in combination with Little Words Project, which is individualized for each patient. So when they first open it, it feels like something special has shown up, and they feel like not a diagnosis has shown up, but something supportive has shown up for them.
I love that.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. The feedback has been incredible. And then we took, right under that, there's a folder that we have that all of the inserts are in an order. So you're not finding little pieces of paper attached to different things. And the first thing on top that we created was an actual checklist that said, these are the things that should be in your box.
Oh, great. Yeah.
There should be 4 boxes of Menopur that say this. There are going to be 3 pens, 900 each, of Gonal-F in your box. And then we support that with the phone call when we schedule it, to say, here's what you can expect. Open your box only schedule it when you're going to be home. Bring it in out of the heat and open it within 12 hours. Immediately before you throw anything out, and I heard you talk about this on one of your other podcasts, make sure that everything that's supposed to be in there is in there. The instructions are going to be very clear on what goes with what what needs to be refrigerated, how to store it, so you can familiarize yourself with it. And let us know immediately if there's
Yes,
anything
that's
out of
key.
sorts. Not when you're in the middle of your cycle and go, I thought I was
Where's
supposed
my
to have moved
trigger shot?
Where's the trigger shot? Yes.
That's the worst.
Well,
That's the worst
I
phone
mean,
call of
That's
all.
the
Is the
worst
trigger
phone
shot
call.
phone call.
how many times do we get phone calls between 6 to 9 p.m. when people are doing that first injection and they're like, oh my goodness, I don't have blank. And it's like, but you've had your box for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we do follow-up calls now. We also now really encourage patients to take possession of their medications at least 3 business days in advance.
Yeah.
Because people were waiting till the last minute, and then there's an ice storm in Memphis, or there's
Yes.
a hurricane in Florida, or there's, you know, the UPS truck tips over, you know, what
Delivered to my
just
next door neighbor and
just
she's
what
out of
I think
town.
I've seen. Yeah, exactly. And that way you leave a little bit of room for the inevitable. And it also allows them to familiarize themselves with it. To your point, it's not like, oh, I'm injecting myself right now. And then the other thing we did was we built out a series of injection training videos that most practices use free of charge, whether you're using our pharmacy or not. And then we use those same videos. They're in a text message to all patients and on our app and portal. So they feel the same as the training you receive from the practice. And so there's on-demand training. If you are pulling out, you know, Gonalef for the first time and you don't remember how to dial up the pen, you can go and do that before you call. Not because we don't want to take the call, but because, you know, they don't generally want to call us, to be honest. They would rather be able to figure this out on their own.
So how, and this is very much driven by, I live in Las Vegas and it's been hella hot, but how long, you said open within 12 hours. Do you guys have any kind of information as to, you know, when you're in the midst of summer in the desert, how long that goes? Like, we will oftentimes tell patients, have this delivered to work, have this delivered to your neighbor who's at home
That's
all
a
the
good
time.
idea.
Have this delivered to some location where there is a body there who can at least pull it inside. But if you, because I've had a couple patients where they left it on the doorstep for 2-3 days, and you can't do that here, especially not between, you know, March and November. Like,
It might spontaneously catch on fire in Las Vegas.
Probably. That's a very real concern. And so
That's it.
how do patients get around that? How do they know, oh, this really has been out too long? You know, maybe they forgot it or something out of their control. Like, how do they know this isn't going to work? I have to get this replaced sooner rather than later.
And as a caveat, are your boxes marked so that it's not necessarily evident that it's fertility medication that's inside?
Yes. So there is very little on them that would, I mean, it just says S&P in the upper corner, but you wouldn't know it if you didn't know it, right? It says, you know, refrigerated items inside, handle with care, fragile, timely. We tell the patients when we schedule their delivery, we work with them to arrange a time. We tell them there are items inside that are temperature sensitive. And we need to schedule this to a time and place where somebody will be able to handle this properly for you. It's also important that they open it, because we have people who take the entire box and stick it in the refrigerator, and there's progesterone and oil in the box, and that doesn't do so well in the refrigerator. We also include a temperature control card inside, sent to any medication.
Nice.
So it will tell them the range. It's very clear. If it's white, it's been out of range. If it's red, I could have the colors wrong, but it's very clear as to whether that box has ever been out of range, even if it's back in the temperature range.
What are the implications of being out of range?
We would replace the medication for them.
Oh, interesting.
But again, we would do that in, you know, I think Gonalef says something like has to be between 50 and 80 degrees. So if it got any colder or warmer than that, anywhere in transit, it would indicate that. It wouldn't be but to the touch, because they don't actually usually have to be, the medications often don't have to be cold, right? They just can't get hot. And then that can be replaced, but that's also why it's important that they look pretty quickly, because if they've, to your point, sat on the porch for 3 days, you know, then maybe it was within range when it got there, but it wasn't properly handled once it was handed off. And that just creates chaos. So we tell them the importance of being there, having somebody handle it properly, and being able to open the box when they can. Because what we didn't say at the beginning here, and maybe everybody knows, is most people are getting these medications through the mail.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people do not live. I mean, you all may be practicing in places that have fertility pharmacies in your markets, but most people are not that close.
Yeah.
Right. Your Houston or Austin office may, but you may not. But there's not always that option. So you're usually relying on these coming to you through the mail, and there is a responsibility for that.
So other than patients calling you and saying, I've thrown my medicine away, what's the next most common thing that patients call you about, kind of worried related to their medications in their box?
How to inject. The self-injection piece is very stressful for people, whether they're doing it themselves or if they have a partner who's doing it. And for those of us who went through IVF, remember that there's nothing less romantic than your partner coming at you with
make friends with your partner before they stick you in the butt.
That's right. That's right. So yes, they are concerned about are they doing it right, or a little droplet was left on their belly, and did they get the right amount of medications in there? There's a lot of conversation about the timing of the trigger. I think the practices tend to do a good job on that, but we reinforce that it's really critical you take it at the precise time they tell you to, and how important that is. And then I think we get a lot of calls. We really encourage patients, if they are medication calls, to call us and not the practice. If they are drug interactions, if they're bleeding, if they're things along those lines, but if they are uncertain about the handling of the medications, because often the practices call us. We get calls from doctors going, I don't know, she's asking me about the cap on their Cetrotide, and I don't know what to tell them. So save them time. And if we feel it's a medical concern, we'll send it back to the practice, but let them come to us with these questions first. It's also why we've opened all 3 of our locations 7 days a week, because there are questions 7 days a week.
Yeah.
What hours are you do you have somebody to answer these questions?
Yeah. So we have locations in LA, the Mid-Atlantic, and Miami. And all 3 are open Monday through Friday, either 8 to 7 or 9 to 7, depending on the location. And then on the weekends, 10 to 2. But we have after-hour coverage. I wouldn't say 24/7. I don't know that you can reach somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning, but until 2 o'clock in the morning. And then again, starting at 6 a.m., there's a pharmacist on call and nurses on call for unpackets, for injection support, for questions.
Awesome. That's a great resource.
When people need, because we get this pretty frequently, and I will often tell patients, like, look, we are, when it's faced with under ordering or over ordering, we tend to under order, because these are such expensive medications. Nobody wants to have $2,000 of medications that they didn't need still sitting in their fridge. And so oftentimes people need refills, or they need just a couple more days because they're going just a little bit longer. And so how do you guys factor that in when someone needs, they're on day 12, they need to make it out to 14, so they need those 2 more days. How much lead time do you need? How much interaction with the practice do you need? Those types of things in order to get those last couple days of meds out quickly.
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting. That is, in my mind, the next obstacle to overcome, which is a bi-directional visibility between the pharmacy and the practice stim sheet, so that we would know what you're telling them to use, and you would know what they have in their possession, and we could figure out a lot more quickly if they
Oh,
were going to
wow.
run out.
Mhm.
So as the EMRs evolve, we are really hoping to have that kind of interface. Right
Mm.
now, we rely on the patient and the practice, and I will say it is practice specific. Different people have very different prescribing habits. Some practices always do tell the patient to take a full 11 days of medication. They're very good about letting us know if they've if they require additional dosing, their medication dose has gone up or the number of days of stim have gone up. But we keep in touch with the patient as well. We have standard follow-up calls with them 5 or 6 days after their full order, then another few days to say, how are you set for medications? If we're going to have a holiday, 4th of
Mhm.
July is a
Yeah.
Thursday, that kind of blows everything out
Yeah.
of the water. Um, and I think, as I say to people, there's only one thing worse than ending up with a lot of extra medication, and that's ending up
Not
with not
having.
enough
Too
medication.
too little
Yeah.
medication. Yeah, I'm kind of more in that
And to
stance.
not put your cycle at risk over a couple of $100s. Now, we don't want people to have thousands of dollars worth of medications,
Right.
and they ought not unless their cycle got canceled or they have a particularly short stim period.
Mhm.
Um, but we try to educate people around when shipping is available. Our team is fully aware of every other pharmacy that carries these products everywhere in the country, so that if we're working with somebody in Nevada and you have an urgent need, we know of a pharmacy that's more local and we can arrange getting that medication to the patient. We've used something called airspace before, which is basically a a courier comes to the pharmacy, puts it on a commercial flight, a
Wow.
courier meets it and takes it to somebody's home. And sometimes that's the only way you're getting somebody medications on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Um, and
Oh,
it's an expensive option, but it beats a
it's less
failed
expensive than a canceled
cycle.
cycle.
Canceled
Yeah.
cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd like
Yeah.
to make a couple comments and then a suggestion. So one for our listeners, you need to be very aware of where you live.
Mhm.
What I
Yes.
mean by that is the further away from somewhere major, big cities, like over 1 million people, the longer it's potentially going to take. Okay. And for those who are not necessarily using S&P, knowing what that pharmacy can support, because some pharmacies can respond more aggressively, like things
Mhm.
that you just described. Other pharmacies may not have that option. Okay.
Mhm.
And so they are not created equal. Just throwing an idea out there when you're talking about that bi-directional communication. I'm wondering if you, since y'all have an app, if you could have something where like the patient could input like the information about the cycle that they know, that be
Yep.
sent with like some
From
sort
their
of
calendar. Yeah.
alert to the pharmacist, and because the pharmacists know how much medicine has been sent out, and it's like, oh, you're within 24 hours of
Yeah.
medication, like that might be an option of, because unfortunately I don't think the reality of the degree of information sharing with EMRs will
Yeah.
probably happen for numerous reasons.
Anytime soon.
For a
That's
long time. Yeah.
But
A
if
long
but if
time.
We're
it
actually working on it. If you want to know the truth, we have an EMR
Oh.
that's working with us on it just about. So it might happen sooner, but I think that's a great idea to
but
have the
that takes
patient
it
Have an
off of
app.
self-report.
and then
Yeah.
give the EMR, and
That could
it's
be the
something that you
Band-Aid.
already own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it engages the patient.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the other thing. Sometimes we have people call and say, I don't remember if I took my medication this morning. They just don't remember. They
Yeah.
remember,
uh,
what was I wearing? Did I do this? So if they actually click on something and say, yes, this is what I did,
Yeah.
it's an affirmation of that. So great idea. Thank you.
On a different note, but a little bit related, and a lot of people know this, but people are evolving in terms of doing IVF, and new people are starting all the time. Can you talk a little bit about the overfill from the different medications? Because some patients will
yes.
call and go, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was empty, and I was just going to have a small amount, and now it's saying I've gotten the whole injection. I'm afraid I haven't gotten the whole amount." So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not a pharmacist, so I don't want to get too
Yeah,
over
no, no,
my
no, that's
skis
okay.
on this discussion. We do not sell on overfill. I know there are some pharmacies that do, only because we think uh, getting at that overfill, particularly for Gonalef, which we sell most of, requires a whole separate set of needles and syringes to pull that out. But we can, with confidence, tell the patient that if they've dialed the pens and used it that way, they're getting the dose they need to do. The pens are the cleanest way to know if you're getting the correct amount of
Yeah.
medication. And we do have pharmacists that will talk to people about how to access overfill and the pros and cons of it, because it's often hard to know exactly how much that overfill is.
But would you
It's
say,
not
kind
as
of give an
exact.
idea, like, would you say 75 international units? Or, I mean, is
It's
it somewhere in that,
about, yeah, I mean, I think
or
most
maybe
of the
more?
product inserts tend to say 75 to maybe
Uh-huh.
150 or
Uh-huh.
120, at least on Follistim, as I understand it.
Hmm.
So, and I think it's mostly on those that are in the pen because of
In the
it's
pen. Yeah.
required. Yeah.
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 Pam, can you make a comment to people who are considering getting their medications internationally as compared to getting medicines from domestic pharmacies within the United States?
Yeah, this has come up quite a lot lately. We were asked by a couple of patients not that long ago to transfer their prescription to an international pharmacy, which of course we cannot do. The
Yeah.
products are often the same manufacturer, so it could still be the European version of Menopur,
Yeah.
or whatever. But I think there's several concerns with that. I think number one, you run the risk of having that stopped at customs and
Hmm.
not getting to you in a timely fashion. They're not held to the same standards as the FDA. That's not to say they're not identical to it, but those products cannot be guaranteed to be up to the same standards as required by the FDA in the US. Um, so there's that. The boxing and the naming of the products can be slightly different, which adds some confusion. And
Yeah.
I think the handling of it is a challenge. When we talked about the need for temperature control
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
timeliness of receipt and refills, where are you getting your refills if it's coming from, Spain and it's going to be stopped? These refills happen generally. You need the medications the next day.
Hmm.
So there are risks associated with it. I mean, I think there's, like a lot of other things, there are some cost advantages to the patient, and it can be very tempting when they are, um, have a lot of cost considerations, but I think there's some real risks associated with it.
Hmm.
And most of these places will say, if, we're not going to issue you a refund if you have a
Yeah.
delay or if this happens to get caught up in
Stops on the
customs.
border, at the border. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And all the customer service that people are very accustomed to in the United States is not necessarily the same elsewhere. And again, not to say that it's bad. It's just
For
there's
the hours of operation. They'll say
Yeah.
they have a US location. This particular one said they had an office in Atlanta, but their customer service hours were clearly European. And I mean, I'm curious, when you have patients from outside the US coming to you, do you have them get their medications in the US or do you let them get the medications local? If somebody's coming from Europe or Asia.
it totally depends on what the structure of their cycle is.
Okay.
We've got some people who they start outside the US and they have physicians who are working with them. And
Yeah.
so it's those physicians in their home countries that are helping them with it. But for the most part, if someone's coming internationally to do a cycle here, for the most part, they are here 100%. And
Yep.
so they get medications within the United States because that's what we know and can control. So
Exactly.
nobody's going to write for something that we can't verify what we're getting filled. But if a, Australian, French, Chinese physician can write for it, great, that's fine.
And they're being stimulated or their stimulation is starting in that other
And their
country.
stimulation is
Yes.
starting somewhere else, and we're just getting the monitoring information. So that's always a dicey proposition in and of itself of, okay, I've got patients all across the world. How do we get them their meds? And especially if a flight delay happens, if meds get lost somewhere in luggage, we always tell, if you're traveling with meds, doesn't matter where you are, inside the country, outside the country, you take them with you on the
On the
plane.
plane.
in your carry-on so that you
Yes.
cannot be separated from them, and you know what they're going through. Like if you get stuck on the tarmac for 2 hours, if you're in the plane, you know what that temperature is much more than you do if your luggage is beneath. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
just some of those practical things, like if you have to travel with medications, they stay on you the whole time.
Yeah. In fact, we do a lot of work with sort of concierge work with practices who tends to be with Chinese patients. And when we know it's that population, they come over to start, they often go back, and then come back over, but we'll give them a cooler for their medications. We've created custom coolers just for them.
Oh, wow.
And not that everybody couldn't use it, but they have a particular need for it. And then all of the Mandarin supporting materials and injection training in Mandarin. So it makes it all more seamless. Yeah.
This has been a fabulous episode. Thank you for letting us into all of the details and behind the scenes, everything that goes into all of this planning from the pharmacy perspective.
Yes, well, thank you, and thank you for recognizing this as important as it is, and such a pivotal moment for the patient when they get this box. Let's kick it off right for them. So
yeah, make it a fun experience where you're getting the online shopping order that's really fun, not anything beyond that. So
that's right.
Excellent.
That's
well,
right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Pam. To our audience, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to tune in next week for more. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review in Apple Podcasts or iTunes or any place where you get your podcasts. We love to hear from you. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So hop on by, leave us a like or a hello.
You can also visit fertilitydocs.uncensored.com to submit specific questions you have about infertility. All questions will be answered on the podcast anonymously for our Ask the Doc segment, so don't hold back. We also love episode ideas, so let us know what you want to hear.
And don't forget, we're putting out an IVF book, so leave us some ideas for our book. And as always, this podcast is intended for entertainment. It's not a substitute for medical advice from your own physician. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.